The AMD RX 6600 was released in late 2021 to a rather tepid response from reviewers at the time. This was during the great GPU shortage, so availability was low and prices were high. Couple that with the cut down PCI Express lanes and you can understand why reviewers weren't thrilled. It's now about 1.5 years since, and crypto mining craze is well and truly over. Prices have been steadily dropping and plenty of stock, both new and used. This is an X mining card I bought off eBay for about 200 Australian dollars or roughly 135 US. Now I know a lot of people aren't comfortable with buying an X mining GPU. It's a gamble with any secondhand goods, but I think the price is right, and considering it was released further into the crypto mining boom, its time in the mines would be less than those cards released a year prior. This RX 6600 I have is the ASRock Challenger model. There is some mild corrosion on the heatsink fins being an X mining card. I don't think anything too concerning. I believe it's on the budget end of 6600 models, but with the card drawing up to 100 watts at stock, it stays cool and quiet under full load, so not a concern. I have paired the GPU with an 11th gen Intel i5 11400 CPU and 16GB of dual channel DDR4 3200MHz memory. It is at PCI Express Gen 3 speeds, so we're losing some performance by not having Gen 4, however I do have resizable bar enabled. Shadow of the Tomb Raider once again, of course. This time we can go with the highest graphics settings minus the motion blur and depth of field, and it's performing fantastic at 1080p. It sits around 100 FPS in this location. It could probably handle 1440p with this game, but I would not recommend this card for higher than 1080p resolutions as it will struggle with newer titles. Next up, let's try Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. This game favors Nvidia, so I was curious how this performs on an AMD card. It runs not too bad, at least near the start of the game. You can set it to Ultra settings, which is the second highest, but you need to turn the ray tracing quality to low to net you a consistently above 60F experience at 1080p. Turning up the ray tracing quality impacts the frame rate quite significantly, so for this card setting it to low is a must, but otherwise a great way to experience this title. Doom Eternal runs great. A high refresh rate monitor is desirable for this game, and this card can output the frame rate to utilize such a monitor, even on the highest graphic preset, Ultra Nightmare. We are running quite close to the VRAM limit. It may become a concern if it fills up and starts to swap textures out. The 1 and 0.1% lows may suffer, so maybe lowering the graphics a notch might be wise. Far Cry 6. This game is well optimized for this GPU's architecture. I've set the graphics to Ultra but disabled all the extended features, which includes ray tracing. The benchmark shows a 25% loss in average FPS when they're enabled, which is not worth it in my opinion. I mean, if you're running a 60Hz display, then you may want to, since the extra FPS doesn't do much for this kind of game, but with a higher than 60Hz monitor, the extra frame rates are an improvement. Regardless of your choice in enabling ray tracing, it's a very solid experience overall. Deathloop has been a challenge in the past, but it seems this card can handle it just fine at 1080p on the very high preset. I have the FPS uncapped just for testing purposes, but I would enable a frame rate lock with this game because the frame rate can fluctuate quite a lot. Maybe 75 FPS cap to give a consistent feel, which is better at least in my opinion. I noticed a bit of a delay whenever you open or close the game menu mid-game. I don't think this happened on other hardware, even those old entry-level GPUs. Doesn't really affect anything, but I thought I'd note it anyway. Okay, last game. Resident Evil 4 Remake. This is the chainsaw demo, which I think is a good showcase on how demanding the game can be. I set it to prioritize graphics preset. Outside in this foresty area is definitely the harder part to run, but this card handles it no problems. Inside the buildings I was seeing around and sometimes above 100 FPS. So yeah, solid performance from the RX 6600 in this new release title. That concludes the benchmarks. I really like the efficiency of this card. 100 watts at stock for this level of performance is a pretty solid result. With electricity prices in some places right now, it's definitely a win for this card. VRAM has been a discussion point recently. Newer games tend to be heading towards becoming more video memory hungry. This is an 8GB card, but I think it's perfectly reasonable for this level of performance. Realistically, you won't be maxing out graphics in newer titles as the GPU wouldn't be able to handle those games at those settings even if it were given more VRAM. So, if you find one used for a cheap, or better yet brand new for an agreeable price, I will recommend it if you're a 1080p gamer. There's also the bigger brothers of this card, the RX 6600 XT and 6650 XT, which are similar in many regards to this one but will give a bit extra performance, about 15 and 20% respectively from what I can gather. I encourage checking prices of all three to find the best value, which will depend on where you live. That's my thoughts on this card. If you'd like to share yours, leave a comment, and thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.